Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another Adobe XD Masterclass. My name is Howard Pinsky, Senior XD Evangelist here at Adobe, and I hope you're all doing well on this magical Friday. A big thank you to Andrew Hockrattle, who just wrapped up the Illustrator Daily Creative Challenge. And if you've been with us all day, you've probably seen a bunch of masterclasses, from Terry White to Paul Tranny to Jason Levine. Fridays are one of my favorite days. And now we're going to dive into Adobe XD. And we've got some new people in the chat. We've got some returning people. If you are tuning in live here on Behance, let me know who you are and where you're tuning in from. We've got Jennifer and Vipin and Victor, Cody and Jack and Elizabeth and Colby. We've got Colby and Cody. Confusing. And Wade, Annie. Great to be here, everyone. Great to see all of you. And Laura and Cara and Miguel. Everyone just keeps coming in. Nice background. Thank you. We got a little avocado pillow over there. You've got to throw in the avocado, right? It's necessary. So if you're brand new to these Adobe XD masterclasses, we definitely dive a little bit deeper than we usually do in the getting started sessions and the daily challenges. So it'll be a little bit more advanced. However, you'll probably still pick up on some tips and tricks. We've got Leandro from Peru and Elizabeth from Michigan, Victor from Brazil, Michelle from Ann Arbor. Great to see everyone from all over the world. I believe Vipin and Rishi are from India. It's actually Saturday over there, which is awesome. Yeah, everyone wants the avocado. I want that too. I actually have an avocado pillow, like an actual one, somewhere over here behind my green screen. All right. Hey, Tim. Welcome. Tim says first time. Tim, this is your first time? Really? Impressive. You got that little badge already? Fancy. All right. So, Cornell thought it was a real room for a second. I guess I've got my lighting and my green screen nailed down. Shay from Toronto, my hometown. Awesome. I love seeing people from Canada and Toronto. All right. Here we go. Hopping over to my screen. Here is my Dribbble account. Let me hop over here, and what we're going to be doing today, we're going to be getting a little bit more advanced with animation and design and masking, a lot of fun stuff. And I posted this on Dribbble not too long ago, and let's see if it loads. Here we go, and it's this little animation of sort of like a health globe. You can also do a mana globe, very similar to this one over here that I just posted on Twitter just a few seconds ago. Right? So we're going to be creating something like that. And if you paid attention to my daily challenge yesterday, I kind of hinted at how this could be done. Victor's saying, I would like to see more insights from the industry about the programs we see here in Adobe XD, if you could, of course. I think we could definitely get a little bit more deeper into the industry and designing at some point. These ones are definitely focused more on Adobe XD, but maybe we can have another show. And sometimes our Adobe Live 2-hour sessions definitely go a little bit deeper into the industries, especially when we have guests. So definitely pay attention to those. So this health globe was kind of a revisit to something I created quite a while ago. And if I scroll down, let's go ahead and see if I can find it on my Dribbble page. So this one here, I created when Auto Animate was fairly fresh, right? And it was fun. But this one had used like 8 different artboards. It was kind of insane. It's got a little bit more depth to it, but it was a challenge. I really wanted to push Adobe XD to see what Auto Animate could really do. And it could obviously do a lot, right? But I revisited it lately, and I created this one here and also the blue one that you saw a moment ago. And this was done using just 2 artboards. And you can also do the entire thing using 1 artboard if you utilize components and tap triggers. So this is going to be a lot of fun. I'm going to be here for an hour. If you have questions about Adobe XD, these animation techniques, any of the design techniques I'm going to be going through, definitely throw them in the chat. I see all of you. So what we're going to do, was it Shay and Akin are talking about Yonge Street. Yeah, I think that's one of the longest, if not the longest street in the world. It's in Toronto, and it just extends for miles and miles and miles. All right, so here we go. I'm going to hop over to Adobe XD. We've got basically nothing, right? We're going to create a brand new document. Now, usually I would go with an iPhone screen or an iPad or a web template, but today, considering I know I'm going to be usually uploading this to Dribbble, for example, I want to go with a ratio that's 4:3. And the one that works best for me, since I'm going to be exporting it as a video and then uploading it directly to Dribbble, is 1200 by 900. And I just entered that here in the custom size area. I'm going to click on that, and it's going to automatically create a document that's 1200 by 900, just like that. I'm going to make this nice and large, and we are going to get going. So I'm going to name this. This one's going to be probably the health version. We'll start with the red one, and then we'll move on to the blue one. All right, here we go. So now, because this is more of a darker aesthetic, I want to start very simple, just by adjusting the background. So over here to the right within our properties inspector, I've got my appearance, and I do have the artboard selected, so any changes I make to this color will apply directly to the artboard. Now, I could go ahead and just make a dark color. Could do that. But I'm actually going to be using some of the color in the background to influence and interact with the actual health globe. So what I'm going to do instead, I'm going to choose a radial gradient. Words are hard on a Friday. I'm so thankful it's the weekend, and it's a long weekend, in the US at least. I'm excited to get this weekend going. So for the middle, I'm actually going to go for some more of a red. Again, because this is going to interact with the health globe that's going to be semi-transparent in the foreground. So I want to keep that in mind. And then maybe on the edges, for now, we're going to go for a darker color. Once we actually add in an image over top of this, we may adjust this a little bit. Now, for the actual circle, right? If you go ahead and click on this, you're going to be able to see we have a circle here. It's going to kind of influence the actual, there we go. You can kind of see it's moving, hopefully, right? So I'm going to move it inwards a little bit. And again, we can adjust these things later on. Gradio. Yeah, I agree. All right, so we've got our background. Now, typically this wouldn't be a very nice looking background. It's very strange. The radial gradient in the middle is kind of harsh, but because we're going to be putting elements over top of it, I'm not super concerned about that just yet. All right, so the first thing we might want to define is the actual globe itself. And for that, I'm going to be using my ellipse tool. Usually I start with a rectangle, but for this, we're going with an ellipse. Of course, you could do a rectangle and just round at the corners completely, but might as well use an ellipse. So I'm going to hold down my shift key, drag it just like this. Bam. Now I've got a lovely ellipse in the center of my document. And if I want to make sure that it's in the center of the document, up at the top here, we've got our alignment and our distribution options. I can hit this icon right here to center it vertically, and then this one to center it horizontally. Or is that the opposite? I don't know. One of the two. Just center it right in the middle of the artboard. Perfect. All right. Now, this is the shape that's going to interact with the background. So there's a few things I might want to do, right? The first thing I might want is a radial gradient. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose a radial gradient just like this. And I'm going to, maybe in the center, we're going to have a nice light color. And we're actually going to add an additional stop right about here, which is going to be a little bit darker. And then this one over here, I'm actually going to drop the opacity quite a bit. And I may also drop the opacity of this one too. Now, it looks a little bit strange right now. It definitely does. But once we start tweaking the blend modes, once we start adding elements over top of it, things will start to come together, right? And this is one of the frustrating things about being a designer or an artist or anybody who creates something. Whenever you first start creating, it always looks terrible. It does. And it could be, it could kind of push you away from designing. But you have to keep iterating on whatever you're working on because it will get better, right? So this looks pretty ugly, right? So what we're going to do, we're going to do a few things. We're going to, I'm going to change the blend mode to hard light, and I'm going to drop the opacity to about 25%. Now, it's a little bit difficult to see right now, but again, we're going to be adding elements over top of it that's going to help us throughout this process. And you can always jump back in here, make some changes to some of this stuff, right? Maybe bump this up a little bit, and this is kind of acting as the shadow around the side. And just make a few changes here. Now again, if I grab the artboard background and I make changes to the colors, you're going to notice that it's nicely interacting with that shape that we just created. Again, it's very difficult to see, so maybe for now, I'll just bump the opacity up a little bit. Almost looks like a security camera, almost, right? All right, so the next thing we might want to do is add some sort of a border with some texture and some depth to kind of house this health globe. So I've already got my ellipse, so I'm going to duplicate it. Hey Leo, welcome everyone who's just joining. I'm going to duplicate it with Command and Control D. And for this one, let me actually just go ahead and kind of reset this. I'm going to reset it just back to a solid white color. This one we actually want a border. We don't necessarily want the whole thing being filled in. So for that, what I'm going to do, I have this one set up already, this ellipse. I'm going to duplicate it one more time, Command and Control D. And I'm going to move this one inwards. And just so you can see what's going on, I'm going to change the color. And now essentially we have two shapes. We have this gray circle that's a little bit smaller. And Tim says, I'm sorry, Howard. I'm afraid I can't let you design like that. Yeah, it's kind of creepy, isn't it, Tim? Now we've got this larger shape in the background. And we actually want to use this gray circle to knock a hole in the one behind it. So for that, we're going to select both of these shapes inside your layers panel. You can also do that on canvas by holding down your shift key and clicking on both of them. And up at the top here, we've got our Boolean options. And I'm going to select this one right here, which is our subtract option. And it's going to essentially knock a hole using that gray shape out of the background. It's exactly what we want. Now, there's a few additional things we may want. We may want to add some texture to this, because if you remember, if I hop back over to Safari for a second, this health globe has a little bit of texture on it, and we kind of want to bring some of that in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hop over to Finder, and I've got some images right here that we can definitely use. And for this one, I'm going to probably grab this texture here. It's kind of nice. It's like a marble. It looks like it has some sand on it. And if anyone's played Diablo or any games like that, it's kind of along that aesthetic. There's a lot of sand in Diablo, at least, level 2 of Diablo 2, for example, or whatever. I'm going to drag this in and just pop it into place. Now, things are looking a little bit flat. We need some texture. We need some depth. We need to make this look really interesting. So to do that, I'm going to duplicate this one more time. So I've got two of them. So here, right over here, I'm going to just type out texture, and maybe this one, I'm going to call this one depth. This is where things are going to start to really take shape. And let's go ahead and grab another texture, like this one over here. It's kind of like rocks or boulders or something like that. I'm going to drag this one in, right? Now, that looks like it just replaced it, which we definitely don't want. So there's a few things we might want to do first. One, we might want to change the blend mode, and you can definitely go ahead and experiment with some of these. We've got overlay, soft light, hard light looks pretty good. It kind of blends really nicely with the texture in the background. We may also want to decrease the opacity a little bit so it's not super strong, right? But we also may want to add a little bit of a radial gradient, for example. Anyone excited for Diablo 4? There's a lot of rumors about that. And the cinematic, the announcement was super cool. So we've got our radial gradient set up, and we want to make sure that, maybe on the inside it's a little bit lighter, and then as you go to the outside of the shape, it darkens up a little bit, right? So for that, we're going to add another stop somewhere right about here. And this is going to be the lighter color. And then this one here, we're just going to darken. And you can really play around with how this looks. And you can kind of see as I push this inwards, we've got this nice glow and border on the inside. And then as you get to the end, it's a little bit darker. And again, you can play with the opacity, just like that. And you've got this really nice looking shape. How's everyone thinking about this? Thinking looks pretty good? You can also duplicate it one more time, just like that. And just by duplicating it one more time, with no changes, all of a sudden you have even more depth, right? And I can increase the opacity. Maybe I can hop into this one, decrease the opacity a little bit, and you can really start to play with the colors as well. So for this, I might want to maybe add in some blue. Same over here, right? I can add in some blue. Or I can add in some red. And you're noticing that that highlight on the inside now has a little bit of red in it, because maybe it's reflecting the health globe on the inside. Nick is saying, can you design this with CSS? Probably not. You can probably do a very basic version of it, but once you start adding textures and depth and things like that, it gets a little bit difficult. All right, Felipe is saying, I lost count how many times I watched that Diablo cinematic. It was, so fair warning, if anyone has not seen it yet, it is very not safe for work. It is gory, but if you're into that stuff, if you're into Diablo, it's a beautiful, I have a good friend of mine who works on the Diablo cinematic, not the Diablo, the Blizzard cinematic team, and he produces a lot of art for these cinematics, and man, those cinematics are just incredible. All right, Cornell's saying it looks like legit 3D globe. It's getting there. It's far from finished. We haven't even added the water yet, or any of the effects or anything, but you know, we've got some depth going on. It's starting to get there, right? And now you can see, now that we have this border, we can always adjust the background gradient just to kind of pull this inward so it's not leaking too much, right? Something like this. Perfect. Okay. Now, because we're dealing with a globe that's probably glass or plastic or some sort of transparent material, we may want highlights, for example. So what we can do now is, over top of our globe, we may want to start adding some of those things. So I'm going to grab my pen tool and let me zoom in so we can really see what's going on. And I'm going to just, you know, drop a line just like this, right? And maybe one down here. Gonna round this out a little bit. And I can go back to about here, drag this down, and then finish it off right about here. And then once I have this done, let me go ahead and turn on the fill. It's looking not bad. It's pretty nice, but I can always double click on these paths and adjust some of the lines just like that. I can bring that in. I'm holding down Alt or Option just to affect one of the sides. Pull this down a little bit, right? I can move this inwards, but of course, it's not really looking super convincing right now, right? So what we might want to do is we can decrease the opacity. We could do something like that. Doesn't look too bad, but we can also utilize a blur. So if you go over here, you might see background blur. Now, if you simply select background blur, it's going to blur everything behind it, right? Which is good for like a glass sort of thing. But if you just want to blur the reflection itself, you can choose object blur. So once I have that done, that's way too much, right? So I just want to drop it a little bit, just so we have a little bit of a blur. You probably don't want to go too crazy. You just want to drop it a touch. And then to finish this off, I think an overlay or a soft light blend mode would look really nice. So we can do soft light, not too bad. We can do overlay. Ooh, that's kind of nice. It's really starting to interact with the element behind it. Now, if you want to go even further with this, right? Maybe you want the edges, or at least the top and the bottom, to kind of fade away, right? So what you can do is, instead of a solid fill, you can actually use maybe a linear gradient, for example. You can probably also do a radial gradient, but let's try linear gradient, see what that looks like. So we've got the top, and we want to add basically a reflection. So we want the top and the bottom to be about the same, and we want the middle to be our actual highlight. So I'm going to add one somewhere around 50%. I'm going to change that to white. Now the ones at the top, we're also going to have them as white. However, because we want it to fade away, I'm simply going to drop the opacity, right? And all of a sudden we have this nice highlight that's kind of stronger in the middle and then fades away as it goes up and down. And of course, if you wanted, maybe depending on the lighting, maybe the top one to be a little bit stronger, you can always increase the opacity a little bit on that one and keep the one at the bottom just like that, right? So now things are starting to take shape. Now there might be a few more highlights we might want to add, right? Let's go ahead and add a circle, for example, right? So I can go ahead and draw out a circle, just like that. Position this here, and I can do something very similar. And what I can do to save myself a little bit of time, I'm actually going to name this right highlight, or highlight, and right? I can copy, simply Command or Control C, go over to this shape, right click, and paste appearance. It's going to take all those attributes of that other highlight that we just created, the linear gradient and the object blur, and apply it to this. Now, of course, I don't know how I feel about this. I think I might want to go for just a solid color for this one, right? And now we can also adjust the actual, I can just pull this up a little bit. I can just adjust the shape, right? Because you have to think about this, right? If you're working with a health globe, it should be pretty round. So as this highlight is kind of going around the globe, you kind of want it to reflect that. So if you just pull this inwards a little bit, it'll give that impression that it's kind of going around, right? And you can also reflect that by rotating it a little bit. And then if you wanted to, you can also use a gradient like we had before, but in this case, it might go from maybe right to left, just like this, and maybe on this side it's gonna be nice and white, and this side, it's gonna maybe fade out a little bit, just like that. Maybe it'll be a little bit darker, right? So that the overlay blend mode interacts really nicely with the background. Elizabeth is saying you can make great art in any program as long as you know how to do it effectively. And I think that's a really good point, Elizabeth. You know, a lot of people, when I uploaded this example on Dribbble and on Twitter, right? They asked me, why did you do that? Why did you do that in Adobe XD? My first answer is, why not, right? I like working in Adobe XD, and I like trying to do new things that are not necessarily UI or UX related. Although you can probably use this in a UI if you're designing for games, right? But the second answer was, usually you would design it or animate this. You design it in Photoshop and animate it using After Effects, but maybe you don't know After Effects. Maybe you don't know Photoshop. XD you can download for free. So it's more accessible, and for some people, it might be more comfortable using Adobe XD, right? Now, of course, if you're working at a big production company, you're probably not going to use Adobe XD to design this in specific, but it's a lot of fun to do, right? So we've got our globe starting to get there. It's taking shape a little bit, right? But you know, there's definitely a few things we can do to make this a little bit better. Vipin is saying, can you give an answer to my question? I did not see your question, so put it in again. I will try my best to answer it. All right. So let's go ahead and just make a few changes. We might want to darken this up a little bit just to get, and you're noticing as I'm moving this around, we're adding a little bit more depth to this, right? It makes it a little bit brighter, a little bit more red. I can also push and pull this inwards. There we go. Things are starting to look pretty good. And it's starting to kind of look a little bit more 3D, right? There we go. All right. It's getting there. Maybe I'll drop this a little bit. I'm very particular with my colors. I can also drop the opacity a little bit more. There we go. So Vipin is asking, can we only have one gradient adjusting line per shape or color? Or can we have multiple gradient adjusting lines per image or shape? So I believe, if I'm understanding your question correctly, at the moment it's just one. But at some point in the future, I'm sure gradients will improve a little bit, but the team definitely has a few more things to tackle before that. All right, I might want to also adjust the background a little bit. I can also adjust the color, just like this. I can pull this up or pull this down. You're noticing it's also affecting the globe in the foreground. All right, so things are getting there. It's not exactly where I want it just yet, but we have a few more things to add, right? Including the water or the liquid that's going to be filling up. So for that, what I'm going to do is I'm just checking questions, make sure everything looks pretty good. All right, so there's a few aspects of this particular element, the liquid that's going to be filling up. And maybe some of you have seen this yesterday during my daily creative challenge. The first thing we want to do is we want to start adding the two different waves that we're going to be using. So I'm going to grab my rectangle, and right about here, I'm going to start at the top left-hand corner, and you're noticing the smart guides are helping me out. I'm going to draw out a rectangle going across my artboard like this. And I purposely want it a lot longer, because a longer rectangle with a bunch of curves, at least two of them, right? We're going to get to the second one in a moment, is going to really help sell the look and the animation that this is kind of filling up like that, right? So we've got this rectangle, and we want to start adding some of those curves. So I'm going to double click on the rectangle to access the path. We've got already 4 going around, right? We want essentially 3 more on the top. So I'm going to add one right about here, one somewhere in the middle, and then one somewhere right about here as well, right? Now, if I were to simply just start dragging these around, we have very harsh lines, which we definitely want to avoid. So in that case, you just have to simply double click on each of the lines to convert them into curves. And now we can really start pushing and pulling the waves of this particular shape, right? And you can also pull these handles a little bit to make it even curvier if you wanted to. So there is shape number 1, right? Simple, effective, good, perfect. All right, Now, shape number 2, I'm actually going to drag over just like this. And all I'm going to do is at the top, I'm going to flip it. Just like that, right? Now, of course, we probably don't want these as white shapes. So the one at the top, which I'm going to name top, and this one's going to be named bottom. The one at the top is going to be a nice light red color. Something right about there. And the one behind it is definitely going to be a bit darker. There we go. Perfect. Andre is asking, I really like what you do. The question is, how much do designers approximately earn? That is a massive question and probably not something I can accurately answer. There's so many factors that go into a designer's salary, wages. Some are freelance, some work per project, some work hourly, some are salaried. It also depends on where you live. For an example, a designer working in San Francisco for a large company probably earns a lot more than a freelance designer working in Oklahoma, for example. It's really hard to say. Some designers are earning $8 an hour, some are earning $200 an hour, depending on where they live, how high up they are in the industry. It's a very difficult question to answer. I wish I could give you an answer, but there really isn't an answer I can give you. All right, so we've got our 2 shapes, right? But of course, they're kind of floating all over the place. We want to mask them inside this health globe. So I'm going to grab the shape that we've been using, which is this one down here. I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to paste it up at the top. And I don't need any special effects on this one, so I'm just going to simply set it back to a solid color. White is fine, doesn't matter what color it is, as long as there's no image inside of it, which is going to negatively interact with the mask. We can just have this. And we want to use this to mask out the other elements inside or underneath it, right? So I'm going to go ahead and name this mask, and I'm going to select all of these. And Usman is saying, wasn't it supposed to be 2 p.m.? So the masterclass is at 12 p.m. Pacific time, and then the daily challenge is at 2 p.m. Pacific time. So I'll be back in a few hours. Yeah. So we've got that set, and up at the top, we're going to go to Object, Mask with Shape. It's going to take all those elements underneath the top one that we selected and pop them in, right? I'm going to name this Water, just like that. Perfect. And now, of course, we can go ahead and make some changes like that. But the big thing that we want to make sure to do is, because this is the initial state, we actually want to grab these elements and just move them down below, just like that, right? Now, eventually, what we're going to do is we're going to select the entire thing, and we're going to change this from pass-through to soft light. That'll allow everything, and I'm going to make sure actually to move this below, just like that. Perfect. That'll allow us to see the water, see everything else behind that water as it kind of fills up. But for now, we actually want to grab those shapes and just move them down like that. Perfect. Okay. Now, there's a few more things that we might want to add to, kind of make this look a little bit more realistic. Maybe some dust particles, for example, right? That could be fun. So here's what we're going to do. We're actually going to use a plugin. And if I go back here, I have a bunch of plugins. And one of my favorite plugins is called Confetti. I actually used this when I was designing the Animal Crossing companion application. So I'm going to grab my ellipse, and I'm going to draw one out, very small. And I might want to add a little bit of an object blur on this, but a very subtle object blur, just like that. And maybe I'll make this a little bit smaller. So I'll zoom in here, really shrink this down a touch. And now I've got this sort of almost like a dust particle going on. And I can change the opacity, I can change the blend mode if I wanted to. Let's drop that, see what that looks like. We can definitely play around with it, right? But for now, we're gonna leave it 100%. And there's a reason I'm doing that, is so that once I use the Confetti plugin, we'll be able to adjust all of them at the same time. So I have this one dust particle selected. I'm gonna go into my Confetti plugin, and you can start off by controlling how many columns and rows you're gonna be using. A lot of this is trial and error. So I'm gonna try, let's say 10 and 10, right? And randomize the opacity, sure, I might want to randomize it a little bit. Rotation, I probably don't need to worry too much about because it's a round circle, right? Even if you rotate it, it's still going to be a round circle. But the scale I might want to randomize so that some of the dust particles are maybe quite a bit smaller, and some of them are the size that I created it, just like this. Now, enable depth of field, probably don't need right now because I did enable that manually using an object blur. And randomize colors, probably don't need that as well because we're sticking with white, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and press run. Watch this. Wow! We got dust particles all over the place, right? And it automatically adds all these here. I'm gonna just go ahead and group all of them, and I can make them smaller if I wanted to, just like that. I can also go back if I want to get a little bit more precise, right? I can just bump this up. So I can go, let's say 30 and 30. This is gonna give me a lot more dust particles, as you can see, right? And some are bigger, some are smaller. And of course there are a lot outside of the globe that we definitely don't need. So what I can just do in that case is oops, where did it go? Is I'm just going to select a bunch of them and just delete them. Like these ones we definitely don't need, right? Just like that. Now for the rest, just like with the water, we definitely want to mask them. So I'm going to select, oh my gosh, I have so many of this. I'm going to select all of these. I'm just going to name this dust. And I'm going to use the same shape, same technique that we did before. Let me actually just grab the mask that's part of the water, right? And I'm just going to select the dust layer and make mask with shape. It's going to grab all those dust particles and put them inside of this globe, right? Name this dust. And I'm just going to move this down underneath the border. And just to keep things organized, I can group these and just call this border. Now, the dust is looking okay. It doesn't really have a lot of depth. And that's where, blend modes definitely come into play. So I can do soft light, for example. That looks okay. Overlay, hard light. No, probably not. Soft light probably is what we're going to do. Just so it's fairly subtle, right? Just like that. Perfect. All right. So, looking at this, I'm thinking it's getting there. It's almost there. It's not where I want it to start animating this thing. I may want to darken it a little bit because, the initial state, this globe is going to be empty, right? So that's where you can really start making some tweaks. So for this, for example, I'm just getting rid of that one stop, allowed the gradient to... Cody says, Howard is so good about naming his layers. Usually I'm not, but in the back of my mind, I keep reminding myself I'm on stream. It's good practice to name your layers. People will laugh at you if you don't, especially if you have like ellipse number 452. Of course, I'm not going to name every single one of my dust layers, but I try. So just removing that one stop is already giving us a little bit of an interesting look, right? Of course, you can add another stop if you wanted to, and just, make some very subtle changes. Again, this initial state is going to be the unfilled version. Yeah, Shay. Shape 7159. I've been there, and it's not fun. All right, so I'm just making a few tweaks to make sure this looks pretty good. We can drop this a little bit. And all of a sudden, we're starting to see it's getting there. It's looking a little bit 3D. It's not perfect just yet. And we can always go through and maybe grab one of these, add another reflection, maybe bump up the opacity a little bit, right? And just start to kind of work this into place, just so it's looking a little bit more round, right? The board is looking pretty good. I might want to make a few changes to this. Let's see. So the depth, we've got depth here. Maybe I'll change this to a little bit more of a red so it's kind of reflecting, right? There we go. That's looking pretty good. Bump this up to 100%. Maybe there we go. Now we're getting somewhere. See, these little tiny tweaks, if you spend enough time, can definitely go a long way. Just that one tweak went from this, right, which isn't too bad, but if we're going for a very dark, gothic, grungy look, just those few little tweaks made that happen, right? Now, One more thing I might want to do before we actually get to animating this is we might want to add a little bit of a reflection underneath. So for that, I'm going to grab there's actually a few things we're going to do. I'm going to grab my ellipse. I'm going to draw one out right down here. And I might want to start with a shadow, right? Because I don't want this floating in space. I'm going to move it right below everything. Just like that. Now for this one, I'm going to start by changing the color to a pure black. It's going to be a little bit difficult to see because the background is dark as well. But I'm going to switch to object blur. And now we have a little bit of a shadow going on, right? Now maybe because this is a sphere, right? It's definitely, the shadow is going to be harsher in this middle area than it would be on the sides. So in that case, we definitely want to go for a radial gradient that goes from left to right. And you can hold down Shift to make sure it's nice and constrained. And very similar to one of the other layers that we created earlier, we'll want in the middle, we'll want a nice dark color. And on the edges, we'll want that same color, but we'll want to drop the opacity. Again, it's going to be a little bit difficult to see, but if I go ahead and brighten up the background just a touch, you're going to see that shadow kind of fades out a little bit. And that should mimic a real world environment because it should be a little bit harsher in the middle of the sphere than it would be on the ends, right? And if I zoom out, you can definitely see it's got a little bit of depth now. It looks like it could potentially be sitting on some sort of a table. And I can drop the opacity just a little bit so it's not too crazy, right? Now, the next thing I might want to do is, can we invert gradients? You cannot invert gradients at the moment, but that would be a nice feature request. AdobeXD.uservoice.com. If you have feature requests, head over there. The team is working on some really cool stuff. I might also want a reflection. So, this globe is very bright, very red. You might see some of that down below. So I'm going to duplicate this, right? Now for this one, instead of this color here, actually, you know what? I'm just getting an idea. Maybe we might want to actually do this. I'm just experimenting. I didn't do this before, but I'm experimenting. I don't know how this is going to go. We'll see. For this one, maybe we'll do a red. Let's do both red, right? Just like that. Now I might want to also pull this downwards and pull this in a touch. I don't know how this is going to look because I haven't done this before. Maybe on the bottom, oops, where's my handle? There we go. So on the bottom where this red is, we might want to drop this just so that we have a little bit up here. I'm going to change this to red, just like that. I'm going to blur it a little bit. I don't know how I feel about this, but we'll run with it. We'll see how this looks. And I might want to, let's try a few different blending modes. Color dodge, overlay, not enough. Soft light. Oh. Okay. That's interesting. Maybe I'll increase this a little bit. All right. Maybe. This could work. Maybe I'll blur it a little bit more because if it's, thinking about lighting and how lighting works, if it's further away from the object, it should be a little bit more blurred, right? So I'll just blur it just a touch more. Okay. That could potentially work. We'll try it. We'll see how that looks, right? Hard light. No, it's probably too much. I also have to remember that on the next artboard, when it starts filling up, I might want this to get a little bit brighter. And Nick is saying, are you going to remove the previous mana from Dribble and upload that one? So I have the old one that I uploaded about a year and a half ago, maybe. That one's going to probably, all of them are going to remain here. But maybe if this one comes out nicer, I may upload this one as well. Who knows? So maybe if I do, okay, here we go. So if I do color dodge, maybe about 30%, on the next artboard, when the water is actually filling up, maybe that'll get a little bit brighter. That might add to the realism a little bit. All right, so this is looking, it's getting there. It still needs a little bit of work, right, to make it look like a globe, but this is the unfilled state. So naturally, it's probably going to be a little bit more dull than the filled state. So once we actually get to the next state, maybe it'll make a little bit more sense. Maybe we'll be able to make some changes to it. But that's looking okay. Now the last thing I might want to do before we start animating is maybe create a little bit of a background. You may have seen in the one I uploaded to Twitter, I added this little background in here. It's sort of like an ARPG fantasy style, thing in the background, right? So maybe we want to do that just to add a little bit more oomph to this design, for example. So just very quickly, I'm going to grab a rectangle, draw one out. I do have over in Finder, I've got some images that I grabbed from Adobe stock. These are really beautiful illustrations. I'll just grab this one, drag it in here, move it to the back. Now, there's obviously a problem, right? Because we are using this layer here, which I should probably name these layers, right? This is going to be the highlight or the reflection. This is the shadow. Now, because we are using a hard light blending mode for this particular object, it's interacting with that background, which we definitely don't want, right? Now, even if we drop the opacity and we adjust that looks interesting actually. But actually that does kind of look interesting. But it's not exactly what we want, right? Unless we're able to maybe blur, I'm getting ideas. I'm getting ideas that I didn't think about before. Let's try something, shall we? All right, so what we're gonna do here, and I'm getting excited because I'm trying something. I don't know if this is gonna work because I haven't done this before, but let's try something. I'm gonna grab this mask we've been using. I'm first going to cut out a hole, right? Just like this. I'm gonna cut this hole out, right? So essentially, this part of the background does not have an image in it. So it's allowing us to see through and it looks great. However, there might be something we might want to do. I'm gonna paste the, I'm actually gonna grab the mask one more time. It's gonna be called background. I'm getting ideas, people. I'm gonna paste this. That's not what I wanted to do. Copy this, paste it, right? And no, this is not what I wanted. So here, I'm gonna grab this mask. I'm gonna paste it up here. Perfect, okay. And I'm going to drag this inwards. Now I wanna make sure that this lines up approximately with the background, just like that, right? Just so that we can isolate just this area. Now, if I go back here, if I put it back here, right, you're gonna be able to see through it. However, here's what I'm thinking. What if we use an object blur, right? Something like this. And then we drop it to about soft light, right? That way we're seeing a little bit, and maybe so it looks like it's kind of, little going around the globe a little bit. Maybe we can double click on this, maybe make it a little bit larger so it's a little bit offset, right? Just like that. Let's put this back here. And let's try a few different blending modes. Overlay is interesting, right? So we're seeing a little bit of that background inside of this particular shape, right? What about color dodge? No, that's way too much. Soft light, hard light. I think soft light might be the answer in this case. And you can blur it just a little bit, just like that, right? And maybe I can turn down the opacity a little bit. So we have a little bit of that background coming in, right? Michelle says you should turn it around so it's more realistic. Oh, would it be flipped? I'm just trying to think of if it's a sphere, right? And you're looking through it, it's obviously going to be distorted, but would it be flipped? I don't know. Yeah, Cody, experiments for science. I don't know if this is going to work. Yeah, I know. Isn't that fun? Look at that translucent. So if I flip it, I mean, you can't really see it anyway, but all right, we're going to run with this. I think this is looking kind of fancy. And of course, I can adjust the opacity of the background if I wanted to, right? Or I can change this to soft or overlay. Or what I can do is I can grab the actual artboard and adjust the color over here to the right. If I bring that up, the background's also going to adjust as well, right? But I'm going to keep it nice and dark. All right, I should probably save this, right? Health globe. Perfect. Okay, so I think now we're at a good spot where I think the animation can kick off and we can start designing the second state. So of course you can use components for this, but just so I can see both at the same time, I might want to use two different artboards. And Vipin is saying you should zoom it in. So I did zoom it in a little bit, but yeah, the bottle acts as a lens. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. But I mean, it's so blurred that you only see a little bit of it, so it might be okay. Of course, if we were to go ahead and drop the blur even more, then we'll see. We'll see how things look. So on this artboard, all we need to do now is just bring the water up. So I'm going to hop into the water mask. I'm going to grab both the top and bottom layers and move these up. Now, of course, if I just did that, everything would be very stale. Those layers would just go, and it would just look, yeah. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to grab, let's say, this layer over here. I'm going to move it all the way this way, and I'm going to grab this layer and move it over. And then to really add, and you may have seen this yesterday, to really add some additional movement to this water, I'm going to double click on each shape and just adjust them a little bit more. So I'm going to move this around. I might want to make this wave a little bit more. Maybe this one, right? And you have to make those sound effects. It's necessary when you're designing. There we go. I'm going to do the same thing for this one. I'm going to double click, make some changes there. Whoops. Move this one down a touch, right? Maybe this one, I'm going to increase a little bit. There we go. Perfect. Now if I click off, we'll see the filled in look. So you can kind of see that this one is a little bit more transparent than this one. Probably need to make a few extra tweaks. However, just by moving those layers, moving them up, swapping them, and adjusting the curves a little bit. Oh, I might also want to increase this a touch, right? Just so that we have a little bit more of a stronger reflection. Perfect. All right, so just by making those few tweaks, we will be able to create a really cool looking animation. Shay says, that's what my problem is. I'm missing the sound effects. Yeah, you got to do the sound effects. So I'm going to hop into prototype mode, and maybe for this we want it to kick off after a certain amount of time. So I'm going to select the entire artboard right here up at the top, and I'm going to drag this handle over to the right, right? The right one looks better. So in this case, it's not about which one looks better. The right one is the filled one, and the left one is the empty one. So both of them should look pretty good, but we're going to see we might have to make some tweaks once we see the animation intact, right? So we've dragged this handle over to the artboard over here. We're going to choose time at the top, and this will allow us to choose a little bit of a delay. Now we're going to choose, let's say, 0.8 seconds so that it doesn't kick off immediately. Also, it doesn't take forever to kick off. And then we want to make sure to choose auto animate over here to the right. And if you're brand new to Adobe XD, I did see a few people in here who have never used XD before. Essentially, the way auto animate works is it looks at the differences between both artboards and it animates the changes. So because I have the same layers and the same naming structure on both of these two artboards, XD will notice that. And it's going to notice that I moved the top and bottom water layer up, and I made a few tweaks, and it's going to animate that. Now, in terms of the animation, I'm going to go for none for the easing options. Usually I go for in and out, but because we can't really see the water at the bottom and the water at the top, easing with none should be okay. And let's go for about 4 seconds, right? And that's it. All right, you ready for this? Let me move this out of the way. So we have a nice clean canvas. I'm going to press play at the top. Watch. Woo. Okay. All right, we can't really see. So the one at the top looked pretty good, but I don't know where the one at the bottom went. So let's go ahead and see what's going on. So if I go ahead and hide this one here. Okay, so this one I might need to make a bit darker because I think it blended too much with the background. You couldn't really see it. So that's one thing. Make that a little bit darker, right? The other thing we might need to do is maybe the one in the background is going to move at a different speed or, kind of appear to be filling up a little bit faster. So in that case, I can maybe just drag this up, make it a little bit larger. Let's see what that looks like. Select the first artboard, press play. There we go. Now, there we go. Fancy, right? Let's do that one more time. And you're noticing the reflection at the bottom is also getting a little bit stronger. Fancy, right? I think that's pretty cool. Another thing you can do if you wanted to, I don't know how how realistic this would be. But you can grab these dust layers and maybe kind of shift them a little bit. Again, don't know if this would be realistic, but I'm very subtly, I'm just going to move them a little bit. And let's see what happens. No, don't like it. Undo that. No one saw that, right? But that's pretty cool, right? Now, we have about 6 minutes left. Maybe one more thing we might want to do is add in some bubbles. Shay says, I picked up XD literally a week ago, so I don't think I'll be doing anything like this anytime soon, but it's super cool to see someone pushing it to its limits. Yeah, this is definitely not something you would typically do in Adobe XD, and I don't expect anyone to do this, but it's a good learning opportunity. If you have some time, play around with this. Try to recreate it. You're going to learn so much about masking and auto animate. You're probably going to make mistakes. Heck, I made a ton of mistakes when I first tried to create this. But that's how you learn. That's how you get better. That's how you start training your brain to think a little bit differently. Because as you start creating crazy things like this in XD, or any other application for that matter, you're going to start to think about these applications a little bit differently, right? All right. Someone's asking about a timeline. Timeline in Adobe XD would be great. It's something the team is exploring. I know that for a fact, but it's probably not a priority right now, especially with all the COVID stuff going on. Collaboration is definitely a focus, but we have some cool stuff coming up pretty soon. All right. So the last thing we want to do in the last few minutes is add some bubbles, right? So this is going to be pretty simple. We're going to add a bubble right here, right? Maybe we will drop the opacity a little bit. These are not going to be the nicest looking bubbles. Maybe we'll add a little bit of an object blur, very subtle, like 1 pixel, right? Just like that. Little bubble, right? We might want another bubble over here, make this a little bit smaller. And maybe another one over here, smaller. Maybe you want a nice big bubble right about here. Whoops, I missed the bubble. Where'd the bubble go? Where's the bubble? There we go. That's the one I wanted, right? And maybe another one over here. We don't need too many bubbles, but we'll want a few bubbles. Maybe we'll increase this a touch. I can also, let's try hard light, color dodge. You can play around with the colors a little bit. These aren't the greatest looking bubbles, but for 3 minutes, I think they will do. That'll do, pig, right? So we've got our bubbles. I'm going to group this and call this bubbles. Bubbles. I'm going to move this over. Now on this particular artboard, the bubbles will not be seen right away. They're going to kind of be down here with the rest of the water. And I might want to, I'm going to copy this layer. I'm going to space them out a little bit. So they all kind of come in at different speeds, right? Maybe I'll put this one up here. Maybe this one up down a little bit, right? Now what we can do is we can hop over here to this artboard. I'm going to go into the water mask. I'm going to paste it. I'm going to move these bubbles up just like this. But maybe by the time it gets to the top, maybe the opacity has gone down a little bit. So I'll just drop the opacity, just like that, right? So now, because we have the same group of bubbles, named the same on both artboards in the same mask, XD should realize that, and let's see what happens. Look at the bubbles. They're subtle, right? They're kind of subtle. What we can do is, in that case, if we wanted to, let's say, draw up the opacity a little bit, maybe I'll move them up here instead. And I'll drop the opacity just a little bit to about 40%. So now, when we play it one more time, look at the bubbles go. Again, they're not the nicest looking bubbles, but I think they could work, right? And now we can really start to tweak this whole thing. So maybe I can just select the globe. Maybe this one, maybe the opacity is down a little bit, so it looks slightly less filled in, for example, right? Just like that. And this one is definitely more filled in, so maybe we can increase the opacity so it has a nice little highlight, right? There we go. And I think that's looking pretty good. Let's play this back one more time. Look at that. That's pretty fancy. Now, of course, once you've done this, creating a mana globe is relatively easy. It's not the, it definitely requires some tweaks. And if you want to, what's cool is if you want to do it on a separate document, you can basically add the colors to your assets panel and just change them all to blue, right? But you would just basically do something like this, right? You would change this to blue, You would dive into probably this layer here. You would change this specific color to a more blue, right? You would go into the water. This color would be blue. You get the idea, right? You can also change the border. So this is a little bit, add some blue in here instead of red, right? Just like that. And all of a sudden, you have a mana bottle or a mana globe instead. I just noticed my camera slowly moving down here. All right. You know, so make some tweaks. You can have as many different colors as you want, but this is going to about wrap things up. One more time, let's play this back. And there it goes. There's the final result. Maybe I'll make this available. If all of you want, go ahead and tweet me at Pinsky. If you want to be able to download this file, I will have to remove many of the textures and the background image because those were licensed photos from Adobe stock. But I can definitely give you guys the actual layers if you want. I can also swap in maybe some royalty-free images into these spots. But yeah, that's about going to do it for me for today. Thank you to everyone joining me. Yeah, my camera's moving. I don't know why. I'll have to figure that out. Big thanks to Cody and Annie and Akin and Monir and Shay and Cornell and everyone else joining me. Stick around in just a few minutes. We've got... is Andrew coming up again? No, he's not. Nick. Oh yes, Andrew and Nick are coming up with office hours, and I'm going to be back in just a little bit with the final day of the XD Daily Challenge. So thanks again, everyone, and I will see you all next time.